Hope everyone's having a pleasant morning. Just want to pass along an observation briefly. We've been driving for about 200 miles through the mountains in Pennsylvania between last night and the early morning here, and towing our 28-foot Featherlight gooseneck trailer enclosed. And if you didn't know it, the Interstate 80 drive through Pennsylvania can be actually a really good test of your truck if you've got a decent sized trailer hitched up to it, because the climbs and the downhills are pretty serious here. And for like the 19th time, I'll say it's not like quite as steep as something like Interstate 70 going through Colorado, or 15 going through, northern like Death Valley, Mojave Desert area. But you do get some pretty steep and some pretty long uphill climbs and some downhill descents. And that can really put your truck to the test. Again, depending on the size of the trailer you're pulling. A couple observations in this Super Duty, the 2023 with the standard output 6.7. This truck does not really have to try. The overall theme with this thing is that it's just effortless. In our Duramax, we've done this drive many times in our Duramax, our 2011 LML 6.6 liter Duramax, in a 3500, a dually. And that engine and that transmission, the 6-speed Allison, which everybody loves, that engine really can struggle at different points on this drive. And the reason why, again, is because the uphill climbs, the uphill ascents are pretty steep and they're pretty long. And so we've had numerous occasions where the engine is downshifted violently, from 6th to 5th, which is pretty calm. But then from 5th down to 4th, you're going from 1600 RPMs all the way up to 2200 suddenly, and the engine starts to race, and you can tell it's not having a good time and not enjoying itself, and it causes you to not enjoy yourself because of how much it's struggling. And then you get the issue, which we started to observe because of how many miles the truck has, where little stuff starts to break. We had the boot, that blue rubber boot, blow off, almost explode off of the end of the compressor housing on the turbo, going up a steep hill, again on Interstate 80 going through Pennsylvania. Of course, it was at night. Of course, we had family with us, a kid, and it took the better part of an hour to get off the highway because the truck was just sort of limping along at like 1 mile an hour because it couldn't make any boost, and the engine was confused, and it was putting too much fuel and too little fuel, and it just didn't know what to do. And we were able to get it fixed, but it was just one more damn thing you have to deal with that you don't want to have to if you can avoid it. We've had that thing happen where the 6-speed Allison, again, a great transmission that everybody loves, it has started to slip in 5th gear because of the amount of stress that's being put on the clutch packs inside it. I think it's the C2 and the C3 clutches, and I think the C3 clutch pack eventually just gives up after a certain number of miles. Again, almost 400,000 miles, which is, I mean, you can't really fault it, because that's a lot of life to get out of a transmission that hasn't even been rebuilt a single time. But still, it's just one more damn thing to have to deal with. This truck, on the other hand, the Super Duty, you never even have to think about what gear it's in. You never even have to think about what the RPMs are, because the engine has so much power, develops so much torque at such a low RPM that it just takes care of business. And that's kind of what you get for dropping huge amounts of cash on a brand new truck. You get the fact that you just don't have to worry about it, and it's effortless, and it's going to take care of business, and you don't have to wonder, okay, is this going to be the time going through the mountains at night in the middle of January when the DEF system decides to take trying to keep it clean here, when the DEF system decides to stop working and give you that reduced power message, or that message that says your speed is limited to 55, and in another 100 miles it'll be limited to 8 miles an hour. In terms of peace of mind, that's what you're buying when you step up to a new truck or a newer truck that is very, very expensive. And again, in the case of the Super Duty, has so much more power and torque than you're going to need, than most people are going to need. This thing, you know the stats, it makes 1,050 pound-feet of torque. It makes, 475 horsepower. And 99% of the population that pulls trailers is never going to need that much power and torque, let alone the high output version. And the point of having a truck with limits that are that high, it's not that you're going to need to use them, but the fact that since you're never going to get close to them, it's never really under any stress. Something else I'll pass along, the final drive on this thing is a 355. It's not a locker, it's a limited slip. And it almost feels like it's a little bit short. We had previously thought a 373 was the ideal final drive for a truck that you do a lot of towing with, and that a 355 was getting kind of tall and you might be sort of hunting for gears, especially going up and down hills. But this thing doesn't hunt at all, and it spends almost all of its time in 10th gear at like 1800 RPMs. And you almost wonder if people with a 342, maybe they have to do a little more up and down shifting, but their RPMs in top gear and 10th gear are a little bit less. Maybe you're down at 1600, 1500 RPMs. And maybe you get a little bit better fuel consumption. Not that your purpose in life is to get better fuel consumption, but it does feel like it's revving a little bit high in top gear, especially when you're unloaded, when you got nothing hitched up and you're just driving at the speed limit, which in this case is 70 miles an hour, and the RPMs are up at 1800, approaching 2000. And it might make you wonder, well, should I actually have gotten the 342? Hard to say. I mean, we spend most of our time towing with this thing, and so it's not as if we're kicking ourselves for getting a 355, but you got to wonder if the people with the 342 might be onto something. Because the truck, this one here with the 355, it has a max gross combined weight rating of 40,000 pounds, max trailer weight, a gooseneck trailer weight of 31,000. We're probably not going to get close to that anytime soon. I mean, the heaviest of a trailer that we have hitched up before is, I think, 17,000 pounds. It's going to be a while, if ever, before we get close to a 31,000 pound trailer with this thing. And so, again, for people who are shopping for a Super Duty, you might want to think about getting that 342 if you think you're not going to be spending all your time going up steep mountain grades with a very, very heavy trailer hitched up. Because again, we're going up a pretty steep uphill right now, and it's sitting there in 10th gear, as it does almost always. You see it's making a lot of boost, close to 20 pounds. I mean, a decent amount of boost. But just something to pass along. And it's the opposite observation that we have in our 3.0 Power Stroke in our F-150. That thing needs a 373. We think it's got a 342 or even a 331. Not clear. But that thing is struggling. That thing's constantly struggling, especially with this trailer with the 28-foot Featherlight. With 6,000 pounds total between the trailer and the load that's in it. That truck struggles going uphill. This thing is not even trying. And again, that's what you get when you drop huge amounts of cash on a new truck. You get a truck you don't have to worry about in terms of its reliability, and you get a truck that has limits that are so high that it's just not trying. And it means, in terms of your peace of mind and your mental workload, you're not sitting there thinking all the time, okay, do I need a downshift? Do I need to worry that I'm lugging the engine? Do I need to worry about the, what gear I'm in? Do I need to lock out 9th and 10th gear? No, you don't have to do any of that, because it just takes care of business. Okay, in terms of the DEF consumption, and in terms of the DPF, and fortunately, you get very detailed information about that when you set up your gauges properly. Notice that our exhaust filter, which is the DPF, it shows 0%, and that is basically a restriction gauge on the DPF, and it's saying that from 0 to 100%, this thing is practically empty, the DPF. And it's been that way almost the entire drive. When we started out last night, it was at 35%. At some point in the first 50 or 60 miles, it went down to 0. And that was either because it did a regen and it burned off all those soot particles that were building up in the DPF, the diesel particulate filter, or because there was so much exhaust heat going through it. And you get a lot of exhaust heat when you're running at a decent amount of load, as you would do when you're pulling a trailer through the mountains. And there was so much exhaust heat going through it that maybe it just burned off those soot particles as a matter of course, without having to do an active regen. And it's been down at 0, meaning the DPF has been effectively empty for more than 100 miles. Probably about 150 miles out of about 200 that we've driven since we started last night. And that's kind of interesting. And so what it goes to show is that the way to keep that DPF clean is to do a lot of highway miles with a heavy load on the engine and high exhaust temps and high boost. And then you won't have to worry about the DPF clogging up, because the DPF will just keep itself clean. And that's our interpretation. We have not seen it go up to 5, 10, 20, 40%, and then back to 0, up to 60% and down to 0. It has stayed at 0 for more than 100 miles. And so again, there you go. We're gonna let this guy pass. These 18-wheelers can struggle sometimes on these steep uphill grades, especially if they lose speed. If you lose momentum, you're kind of, what's the clean word to use? You're out of luck. Let's just say it like that. And that's the same problem. Again, the same problem we have in that Duramax. You got to have a lot of momentum going into these steep uphill climbs in that Duramax with a heavy trailer. With the Super Duty, you could start it. You could do this hill easily from a standing start at the bottom. You could accelerate the entire way up the hill and just not have to worry about it. Again, peace of mind. So that's the observation on the DPF. It gets clean and it stays clean when you're pulling a trailer and putting some load on the engine and getting that boost up and getting those exhaust temps up. When you're in the city, when you're just cruising around, no, your DPF is going to fill up, and then it's going to have to do an active regen, and then it's going to fill up again numerous times. All right, it just said we passed the highest point east of the Mississippi on Interstate 80. That's great. Like I said, for the 19th time, if you want to know, if you want a good test of your truck and you don't live out in the Rockies, take it to Pennsylvania, the eastern half of Pennsylvania on Interstate 80. Okay, next, the DEF consumption. It's at 41% now. It was at 48 when we started. So we have used about 7% of our DEF, our diesel exhaust fluid, in about 200 miles of driving it. And 7% of a 7-gallon tank is around a half a gallon. So if you call it a half a gallon of consumption in 200 miles, that means it's about a quarter of a gallon every 100 miles. And people like to say that this truck drinks, that this truck guzzles diesel exhaust fluid. And to be honest, that's nothing to complain about, because the more diesel exhaust fluid this truck is using, the less it has to use the EGR system to get rid of the nitrogen oxides in the exhaust, which some people claim are harmful and poisonous. And that's true when you're in a city environment and the air is stagnant, like in Southern California and like the Central Valley or something. It's not an issue when you're going through a rural area like here in Pennsylvania, like large parts of the country. It doesn't make a difference how much nitrogen oxide you put in the environment. But that's another discussion. The fact, though, is that the DEF system, the more you're using DEF, diesel exhaust fluid, the less you have to use that EGR to get rid of nitrogen oxides. So it's not really anything to complain about. And again, it's going through, what did I say, a quarter gallon every 100 miles? So 2.5 gallons every 1,000 miles, and the full 7 gallons every, call it 2,000 or 3,000 miles. Again, it's just not an issue. All right, not a lot of other observations to pass along that we haven't already covered. We love this heads-up display. Works great. If we could make one suggestion, it might be nice to have the tachometer on the standard version of the heads-up display. There's also a tow haul version of the heads-up display, and you can select it. And that's got your tachometer, but it also has less information than the standard version. Like, it gets rid of a bunch of stuff that this one shows you, and it shows the tachometer instead. And what would be nice is to see the tachometer included in this one. And I know Ford doesn't want to junk it up with a ton of information and make it just as cluttered and just as distracting and unreadable as the full digital gauges that they have, which again, in our opinion, are not an improvement over analog ones. But what's there to say? It works very well as it is. It would just be nice to have that one little piece of information, additional information. All right, I think that's all for now. Again, everyone, hope you're having a pleasant day. It's a little bit rainy, overcast here. You got some nice, pretty fall foliage if you're into that kind of thing. And we're just having a great drive. Very, very easy drive. Extremely easy drive. Especially compared to some of the other trucks we've driven through here. All right, thanks. We'll talk to you later.